My name is Anna, and I'm a 35-year-old elementary school teacher. I never expected to be sitting in my parents' lawyer's office just 1 week after their funeral hearing, that they had left their entire estate to my younger brother Michael, the brother who moved across the country and barely called, the brother who wasn't there when they needed someone most. Meanwhile, I had dedicated my life to caring for them, especially during their long illnesses. What happened next stunned everyone, including myself. Before I share my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved, and let's dive into how I handled the most painful moment of my life. Growing up in our modest two-story house in a middle-class neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, I was always the responsible one. As the eldest child, I learned early on to be my parents' helper, setting the table for dinner, helping mom fold laundry, or organizing dad's tools after he finished a home project. These weren't just chores to me. They were ways I connected with my parents and earned their proud smiles. Our family wasn't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Dad worked as an accountant at a local firm, while mom taught fourth grade at the neighborhood elementary school. We had enough for occasional family vacations to the lake and presents under the Christmas tree, but we were raised to understand the value of hard work and saving. Family game nights were sacred in our household. Every Friday, we'd gather around the dining table with bowls of popcorn and play Monopoly, Scrabble, or cards. Mom was surprisingly competitive with Uno, and Dad always tried to build hotels on Boardwalk and Park Place. Those nights of laughter and friendly competition are some of my most cherished memories. When it came time for college, I chose Ohio State, just a 30-minute drive from home. Michael teased me about not spreading my wings, but I had my reasons. Mom had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer my senior year of high school. Though she recovered after treatment, I wanted to stay close enough to help if the cancer returned. Besides, OSU had an excellent education program, and I had always dreamed of following in Mom's footsteps to become a teacher. After graduation, I secured a position teaching third grade at a school just 15 minutes from my parents' home. It wasn't the most prestigious offer I received. A school in Cincinnati had courted me with a higher salary and better benefits, but being near family mattered more than money. 3 years later, when I had saved enough for a down payment, I bought a small but charming bungalow, just 10 minutes from my parents. Our Sunday dinners became a tradition that anchored my week. I'd arrive early to help Mom prepare roast chicken or Dad's favorite meatloaf. We'd talk about my students, Dad's clients, and Mom's garden as we chopped vegetables and set the table. Sometimes Michael would call during dinner, and we'd put him on speakerphone, his voice traveling across the country to join us briefly before he inevitably had to go. Holidays were always my domain. I coordinated Thanksgiving, making sure we had Mom's cornbread stuffing, and Dad's preferred pumpkin pie with extra whipped cream. Christmas meant stringing lights on the house for Dad when his arthritis began to make climbing ladders difficult, and helping Mom wrap presents late into the night. Even when Michael didn't make it home, which became increasingly common. As years passed, I ensured our traditions continued. When Dad had his hip replacement surgery 6 years ago, I took 2 weeks off work to stay at their house. I slept on the pull-out sofa to be within earshot if he needed help during the night. I drove him to physical therapy appointments, prepared meals according to his dietary restrictions, and helped him practice his exercises. Mom was grateful for the support, especially as she had begun experiencing fatigue that we later discovered was her cancer returning. During Mom's second bout with cancer, I became well-versed in the chemotherapy schedule, the anti-nausea medications, and the best ways to help her maintain her dignity through hair loss and extreme fatigue. Every Tuesday was chemo day, and I arranged my teaching schedule to have late starts on Wednesdays, so I could stay overnight at their house after particularly difficult treatments. These weren't sacrifices in my mind. They were simply what family did for one another. Still, there were moments when I wondered about the path not taken. The teaching conference in London I couldn't attend because it coincided with Dad's surgery. The dating relationship that fizzled because I couldn't devote enough time between teaching and family responsibilities. The promotion to curriculum coordinator I declined because it would have meant less flexibility for Mom's appointments. Through it all, I never expected anything in return. I didn't help my parents to secure an inheritance or earn special favor. I did it because I loved them, because they had always been there for me, and because it felt right. When I'd occasionally express fatigue or frustration, Mom would squeeze my hand and say, "Anna, you've always been our rock." Those words meant everything to me and gave me the strength to continue when caregiving became overwhelming. I felt secure in their love, and that was enough. Or so I thought until that day in the lawyer's office when I discovered just how wrong I had been. While I was the responsible eldest, Michael was the baby of the family, 5 years younger and seemingly born under a lucky star. He had our father's charm and our mother's artistic talent, a combination that made it difficult for anyone to stay mad at him for long, including our parents. From an early age, it was clear that different standards applied to Michael. If I brought home a B+ on a test, I'd receive a measured, "Good job, but let's see how you can improve next time." When Michael scraped by with a C, it was celebrated. "Look at how well he's doing in such a challenging subject." This pattern established early that Michael was special, and expectations for him were simply different. His childhood room was a testament to the grace he was afforded. While mine was neat with books carefully arranged on shelves, his looked like a tornado had passed through daily. Mom would sigh and close his door saying, "He's just creative. Creative people aren't always organized." Dad would chuckle and add, "The boy's got bigger things on his mind than cleaning." Middle school brought the first signs of real trouble. Michael began running with a crowd of kids who seemed to have little supervision and less direction. When he missed curfew, there were concerned talks but few consequences. When his grades slipped, tutors were hired rather than privileges revoked. I remember overhearing Mom tell a neighbor, "He's just finding himself. All the truly exceptional people are late bloomers." High school saw Michael's transformation into what can only be described as the family rebel. Weekend parties became his priority, and more than once I received panicked late-night calls to pick him up from situations that shouldn't have involved a 16-year-old. I covered for him countless times, driving to sketchy neighborhoods at 1 a.m. to bring him home smelling of beer and cigarettes, sneaking him upstairs while our parents slept. His senior year, when he was at risk of not graduating, I spent hours at our kitchen table tutoring him through basic coursework he'd neglected. "You're so good with him, Anna," Mom would say appreciatively, as though his academic salvation was naturally my responsibility. I didn't mind helping, but I did mind that it was expected rather than appreciated as the significant sacrifice it was. When college applications rolled around, Michael applied exclusively to schools in California. "I need to get away from this boring town," he announced at dinner one night. I saw the hurt in Mom's eyes, but also the resignation. Dad simply nodded and said sometimes a man needs to forge his own path. No one mentioned that this path would be funded entirely by our parents, depleting the college savings that had been carefully built for both of us, but had been partially used for my more affordable in-state education. Michael was accepted at UC Santa Barbara, and just like that, he was gone. The distance he created wasn't merely geographical. Phone calls home became increasingly rare. When Mom or Dad called him, they often went straight to voicemail. Texts might be answered days later with brief responses. Birthdays were acknowledged with last-minute Amazon gifts that suggested little thought beyond the click of a button. Holidays were the most painful illustration of Michael's absence. Each Thanksgiving and Christmas, Mom would set a place for him until the last possible moment, hoping he might surprise us. Most years he had an excuse: a friend's ski trip, a girlfriend's family gathering, a work commitment that couldn't possibly be rescheduled. On the rare occasions he did come home, he spent more time on his phone than engaging with the family he hadn't seen in months. Meanwhile, Michael's career in tech flourished. After college, he landed a position at a startup that eventually went public, making him financially successful beyond what our middle-class parents could have imagined. He lived in a sleek apartment in San Francisco, took international vacations, and drove a car that cost more than a year of my teaching salary. Yet despite his financial success, it was our parents who still sent him money. "Just a little something to help with the rent," Mom would say as she wrote a check, though we all knew San Francisco was expensive, but not beyond Michael's means. "He's establishing himself," Dad would explain when I questioned the logic of sending funds to someone who earned 6 figures. For my birthdays, I received thoughtful but modest gifts. Michael received significant deposits to his account. The inequality wasn't about the money itself, but what it represented. It was as though Michael's value increased with his distance, while my dedication was simply expected. The more he pulled away, the harder our parents worked to maintain their connection to him. The more I gave, the more was assumed I would continue to give. I tried to maintain a relationship with my brother despite everything. I sent texts about my students' funny moments, knowing he wouldn't respond, but hoping to create some connection. I mailed care packages of Mom's homemade cookies to his various apartments' addresses. I had to practically pry from him. I defended him when family friends asked pointed questions about his absence. The last holiday Michael attended was Christmas, just 4 months before Dad passed away. Mom was already in hospice care at home, and Dad's Parkinson's had progressed to the point where his hands shook too much to open presents without help. Michael arrived late on Christmas Eve and announced he'd need to leave the day after Christmas for a team-building retreat. He spent most of Christmas Day on his phone, stepping out for important calls during dinner. I caught Mom watching him with such longing that it broke my heart. She just wanted time with her son. And even then, knowing it might be their last Christmas together, he couldn't fully be present. That night, after Michael had gone to bed early claiming jet lag, Dad pulled me aside. With trembling hands, he pressed a small box into mine. "Your Christmas gift," he said. Inside was a delicate sapphire pendant that had belonged to my grandmother. "We want you to have this now," he explained, his voice soft. "You've always been here for us." It was the closest he ever came to acknowledging the disparity in what was asked of their children. I cherished that moment of recognition, never imagining it would stand in such stark contrast to their final wishes. 5 years ago, our family's life changed irrevocably when Dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. What began as a slight tremor in his right hand quickly progressed to affect his balance and speech. The father who had always been strong and capable, the man who built our backyard swing set and taught me to change a tire, suddenly needed help with buttons and signing his name. From the moment of diagnosis, I increased my already frequent visits to their house. Monday and Wednesday evenings were dedicated to driving Dad to his neurologist and physical therapy appointments. I researched the disease extensively, joining online support groups and ordering books to better understand what he was experiencing and how we could adapt our home and routines to help him maintain independence as long as possible. Mom tried to shoulder the bulk of his care, but at 70, she had her own health limitations. I noticed her growing exhaustion, the dark circles under her eyes, the weight loss she tried to hide under loose sweaters. When I suggested hiring in-home help, they both refused. "We don't want strangers in our house," Dad insisted. "Besides, we have you." Those words carried both love and an unspoken expectation that made me both proud and, if I'm honest, occasionally resentful. Especially when I called Michael to update him on Dad's condition, and he responded with a quick, "That's tough. I'll try to visit soon," before changing the subject to his recent promotion or new girlfriend. 3 years into Dad's illness, our family was dealt another devastating blow. Mom's routine mammogram revealed that her breast cancer had returned, this time more aggressively, and having spread to her lymph nodes. The prognosis was guarded at best. Suddenly, I wasn't just helping one parent. I was caring for both. The decision to take a sabbatical from teaching wasn't difficult. My principal was understanding, my colleagues supportive. I had accumulated enough savings to manage for a year with careful budgeting. What was difficult was calling Michael to tell him about Mom's diagnosis and hearing him say, "I can't get away right now, but keep me posted." I converted my parents' formal dining room into a bedroom for them, moving in a hospital bed for Dad, and placing their regular bed alongside it so Mom could still sleep near him. Their bedroom upstairs had become too difficult for Dad to access. I installed grab bars in the bathroom, purchased a shower chair, and rearranged the kitchen so essential items were within easy reach. My days fell into an exhausting routine. Mornings began at 5:30 a.m., helping Dad with his first round of medications and assisting him with bathing. I'd prepare breakfast that Mom could keep down despite her nausea from chemotherapy, then organize their medications for the day in clearly labeled pill organizers. By 9 a.m., I'd be coordinating with their doctors, updating medication lists, and scheduling appointments. Afternoons were filled with medical visits, oncology appointments for mom, physical therapy for dad, pharmacy runs for new prescriptions. I became adept at navigating insurance paperwork, fighting denials, and researching clinical trials that might offer mom more time. Evenings meant preparing dinner, often separate meals, to accommodate their different nutritional needs and abilities to chew and swallow. After helping with evening medications and getting them settled for the night, I'd collapse on the sofa in their living room, too exhausted to drive the 10 minutes to my own empty house. More often than not, I'd be awakened by dad's calls for help in the night, or mom's bouts of pain that required additional medication. The financial strain was significant but manageable until mom's cancer treatment required a specialized medication that their insurance only partially covered. The out-of-pocket cost was staggering, nearly $2,000 per month. I dipped into my retirement savings, telling myself it was temporary, that her health was worth any financial sacrifice. I reached out to Michael repeatedly during this time. "Mom and Dad need us both now," I texted. "Even if you can't be here physically, could you help with some of these medical expenses?" The responses varied from, "I'm really tight this month," to, "I'll see what I can do," to complete silence. Eventually, he did send a check for $5,000, a sum that covered less than 3 months of mom's medication, but that he presented as though it were an enormous sacrifice. When Michael did visit, his appearances were brief and awkward. He seemed uncomfortable with dad's physical decline and mom's frailty. He would stay for perhaps a day, usually at a hotel rather than the house, explaining that he needed good Wi-Fi for work calls. These visits were more stressful than helpful, as both parents would expend precious energy trying to appear better than they were for his benefit. Despite everything, there were beautiful moments in those difficult years. Dad, even as his speech became more slurred, would still tell the corny jokes that had made us groan as children. "Why don't scientists trust atoms?" he'd ask, pausing for dramatic effect. "Because they make up everything." His laugh, still robust despite his declining body, would fill the room. Mom, between treatments that left her weak and nauseous, would insist on sitting in the garden I maintained for her, pointing out birds and reminiscing about family camping trips when Michael and I were small. "Remember how you always wanted to help pitch the tent?" she'd say, and Michael would wander off looking for frogs. These moments of connection and memory became precious lifelines amid the grueling routine of caregiving. As their conditions worsened, I witnessed the cruel progression of both diseases. Dad began to experience cognitive decline, a less discussed symptom of advanced Parkinson's. There were days he called me by my mother's name, and eventually days he didn't recognize me at all. Mom's cancer spread to her bones, causing pain that even the strongest medications couldn't fully address. During their final months, I slept on a cot between their beds in the dining room, alert to every sound, ready to adjust an oxygen mask or administer pain medication. Dad passed first on a quiet Tuesday morning in March. I was holding his hand, reading aloud from his favorite Louis L'Amour Western. Mom followed just 6 weeks later, as though, having lost her partner of 50 years, she had little reason to continue her fight. Michael arrived for Dad's funeral 20 minutes before the service began and left immediately after. For Mom's funeral, he stayed slightly longer, standing awkwardly at the reception and accepting condolences from people who knew his name but little else about him. In both cases, I had handled everything: choosing caskets, writing obituaries, selecting hymns, ordering flowers, and arranging receptions. Michael's only contribution was showing up. As I stood in the cemetery watching Mom's casket being lowered next to Dad's, exhaustion and grief overwhelmed me. But beneath those emotions was a quiet pride. I had done everything possible to make their final years comfortable and dignified. I had been there, and surely they had recognized that in the end. 1 week after we laid Mom to rest beside Dad, I found myself sitting in the wood-paneled office of Harold Greenspan, my parents' attorney for over 30 years. The room smelled of leather-bound books and furniture polish, an oddly comforting scent amid the surreal experience of discussing my parents in the past tense. I was exhausted beyond measure. The previous week had been a blur of thank you notes to funeral attendees, donating Dad's clothes to veterans services, and beginning the overwhelming task of sorting through 50 years of my parents' accumulated possessions. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my black dress hung loosely on my frame, evidence of the 15 pounds I'd lost during the intense final months of caregiving. When Michael walked in precisely at 10 a.m., I was surprised. Part of me had expected him to find an excuse to attend via phone. He was dressed in an expensive charcoal suit that looked freshly pressed, a stark contrast to my rumpled attire. He nodded in my direction, but took a seat at the opposite end of the conference table, placing his phone face up beside him. Harold shuffled some papers, cleared his throat, and began with condolences that sounded sincere despite the formulaic nature of such meetings. "Your parents were fine people," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. "I considered them friends as well as clients." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Harold had been a fixture at my parents' holiday parties and summer barbecues. He had watched Michael and me grow up. There was comfort in having this familiar figure guide us through this difficult process. "As you know," Harold continued, "we're here to discuss the distribution of your parents' estate according to their last will and testament, which was updated and signed 6 months ago." 6 months ago. The timeline registered dimly. That would have been when Mom entered hospice care, when Dad's cognitive decline had accelerated significantly. Harold began reading the document, his voice formal and detached. The legal language washed over me until certain phrases cut through the fog of my grief with sudden, shocking clarity. "To our son, Michael James Wilson, we leave the entirety of our estate, including but not limited to the family home at 347 Maple Street, all financial accounts and investments, and all personal property contained within the home." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "I'm sorry," I interrupted. "Could you repeat that?" Harold looked uncomfortable, but complied, reading the same devastating sentence again. My parents had left everything, every single thing, to Michael. The room seemed to tilt. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears as Harold continued reading, his voice now seeming to come from a great distance. There was a single exception to Michael's complete inheritance. "To our daughter, Anna Marie Wilson, we leave her mother's wedding ring in recognition of her assistance during our final years." Assistance. The clinical word felt like a slap. Assistance was what you gave to someone who dropped their groceries. Assistance was not what you called 3 years of round-the-clock caregiving, of financial sacrifice, of putting your entire life on hold. I became aware that my breathing had grown rapid and shallow. Across the table, Michael shifted in his seat, his expression a strange mixture of discomfort and something else I couldn't quite identify. Not triumph exactly, but perhaps satisfaction. "There must be a mistake," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "They wouldn't have. This can't be right." Harold removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief in what seemed like a deliberate delay tactic. "I'm afraid there's no mistake, Anna. Your parents were quite clear about their wishes." "But why?" The question escaped before I could contain it, naked in its pain and confusion. Harold looked genuinely distressed. "It's not my place to explain their reasoning, only to execute their wishes as stated in the legal document." I turned to Michael, searching his face for any sign of surprise or confusion that might match my own. There was none. "Did you know about this?" I asked him directly. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Not specifically, no, but..." "But what?" My voice had found its strength, now fueled by a rising sense of betrayal. Harold cleared his throat again. "I should perhaps mention that Michael accompanied your parents to my office when they updated their will." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Michael had been involved in this decision. He had sat in this very office while our parents disinherited me. "The total value of the estate," Harold continued with clinical detachment, "including the house investment accounts and retirement funds, is approximately $1,200,000. The number hung in the air between us. It wasn't a fortune by today's standards, but it was significant, enough to provide security to replenish the retirement savings I had depleted, while caring for them to perhaps finally put a down payment on a larger home than my small bungalow. And it was all going to Michael, who had contributed nothing to our parents' care, who had built his own successful life 3,000 miles away, who already had financial security I could only dream of on a teacher's salary. Anna, Michael said, breaking the heavy silence, we can figure something out later, once everything's settled. His tone was conciliatory but noncommittal. There was no acknowledgement of the fundamental injustice, no recognition of what I had sacrificed. Just a vague promise that held no legal weight whatsoever. I stood up, my movements mechanical. Thank you for your time, Harold, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Is there anything I need to sign today? Harold seemed startled by my composure. No, nothing right now. The ring is in the safe at my office. You can pick it up whenever you're ready. I nodded and walked out without looking back at Michael, though I heard him call my name as I pushed through the heavy oak door into the bright spring morning that seemed to mock my darkness. In my car, parked on a quiet side street, the composure finally shattered. Sobs tore through me with such force that I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I beat my fists against the steering wheel until they ached, screaming questions to parents who could no longer answer. Why? After everything, why? The betrayal was complete, devastating, and utterly incomprehensible. The days following the will reading passed in a blur of grief unlike anything I had experienced before. This was different from the sorrow of losing my parents. That had been a clean pain natural despite its intensity. This new anguish was contaminated by confusion, betrayal, and questions that circled endlessly with no resolution. I called in sick to school for the first time in years, unable to face my third-grade students with their innocent questions about why my eyes were red or why I looked so sad. My principal, who had been supportive throughout my parents' illnesses, urged me to take more time. The school year is almost over, Anna. We can arrange a substitute for the remaining weeks if you need it. Sleep became elusive. I would lie awake until 3 or 4 in the morning, replaying memories, searching for clues I might have missed. Had there been signs that my parents resented my care rather than appreciated it? Had they secretly blamed me for some failure I couldn't identify? The questions tormented me through the dark hours until exhaustion finally claimed me just before dawn. Friends tried to help but couldn't possibly understand. Maybe they thought Michael needed it more than you do, suggested my closest friend Bethany. You're so capable and independent. Her attempt at consolation only deepened the wound. Was I being punished for my strength, for not needing them enough while giving everything I had? I couldn't bring myself to tell many people what had happened. It was too painful, too humiliating. When colleagues or acquaintances asked about the will or my parents' house, I deflected with vague responses. It's all being handled, or these things take time. The truth felt too raw to expose to casual inquiry. About 2 weeks after the will reading, I forced myself to go to my parents' house, no Michael's house now, to collect some personal items I had left there during my time as caregiver. I had been avoiding this task, knowing how painful it would be to enter the home that had been the center of my life for so long, knowing it no longer belonged to me in any way. I used my key, half expecting the locks to have been changed already, but the door opened as it always had. The house was eerily quiet, the silence emphasizing the absence of the medical equipment that had occupied the dining room. Michael had wasted no time in having it removed, though he hadn't yet begun clearing out our parents' personal belongings. In the spare room where I had occasionally slept, I found my overnight bag, some clothes, and a few books I had been reading to Mom during her final weeks. As I gathered these items, I noticed a leather-bound book partially hidden under the bed. Pulling it out, I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. It was his journal one he had kept sporadically for years, but more consistently during his illness. I sat on the edge of the bed, the journal heavy in my hands. Reading it felt like an invasion of privacy, but he was gone now, and something compelled me to open it. Perhaps here I would find answers to the questions that haunted me. What I discovered was far worse than anything I could have imagined. The entries from the past year revealed a disturbing pattern. Michael had been telling our parents that I was after their money, that I had discussed putting them in a nursing home against their wishes, that I complained about caring for them to anyone who would listen. According to the journal, Michael had told Dad that I had consulted lawyers about gaining power of attorney to control their assets. None of it was true. Not a single word. One entry stood out with particular clarity. Michael says Anna has always resented him because we loved him more. Says she's only helping us now to ensure her inheritance. Hard to believe, but why would he lie, Eleanor? Mom is heartbroken. My hands shook as I turned the pages, reading entry after entry that documented my brother's systematic campaign to poison my parents against me. He had taken advantage of Dad's cognitive decline and Mom's medication-induced confusion to plant seeds of doubt about my motives and character. The final entry, dated just a week before they signed the new will, read, "Michael says changing the will is the only way to protect the family legacy. Says Anna would squander everything on frivolous things. He promises to take care of everything after we're gone. Hard to know what's right anymore. So tired." I closed the journal, physically ill from what I had read. My parents hadn't betrayed me after all. They had been manipulated and deceived during their most vulnerable time by the son they rarely saw, but desperately wanted to believe in. Still reeling from this discovery, I decided to speak with their longtime neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who had often helped with small errands when I couldn't be there. Her revelation was equally disturbing. "Your brother was here more than you know," she told me over tea at her kitchen table. "Not to help, mind you. He would come when you were at school or running errands, brief visits, maybe an hour or two. Your father seemed agitated after these visits. I asked your mother about it once, and she said Michael was helping them organize their affairs." Mrs. Peterson hesitated, then continued. "The last time he came about 6 months ago, I was bringing over some soup. I overheard him through the open window. He was, well, he was pressuring them about their will. Your mother was crying. I nearly went in to intervene, but then he left and I didn't want to upset them further by mentioning it." Armed with this new information, I began a more thorough investigation. I requested copies of my parents' bank statements, which I still had legal access to, as I had been a co-signer on their accounts during their illnesses. The statements revealed multiple transfers to Michael in the final months of their lives, small amounts at first growing larger as their conditions worsened. Nearly $40,000 had been transferred to him in the 6 months before they died. Finally, I checked their email accounts, which I had managed for them during their illnesses. There I found messages from Michael promising to take care of everything and be there whenever you need me. Promises that were never fulfilled. More disturbing were emails where he subtly reinforced the lies he had told in person, referencing conversations that had never happened, concerns I had never expressed. The full picture was now clear, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. Michael had deliberately manipulated our dying parents, turning them against me for financial gain. He had taken advantage of their cognitive decline, their medication-induced confusion, and their desperate desire to believe their absent son still cared for them. My initial reaction was rage so intense it frightened me. I researched legal options for contesting the will, contemplated exposing Michael's actions to our extended family and friends, even fantasized about confronting him publicly at his workplace. The anger was all-consuming, threatening to transform me into someone I didn't recognize. But beneath the fury was a deeper, more painful emotion, crushing disappointment. Not just in Michael, whose betrayal was beyond comprehension, but in myself. I had failed to protect my vulnerable parents from manipulation. I had been so focused on their physical needs that I hadn't recognized the psychological warfare being waged during my absences. As the initial shock subsided, I found myself at a crossroads. I could fight potentially for years through an ugly legal battle that would drain what energy I had left and possibly yield no results. Or I could find another way forward, one that wouldn't keep me chained to this pain indefinitely. The decision came to me gradually, shaped by small moments rather than a single epiphany. A student's innocent question about forgiveness during a class discussion. A quote in a book I was reading to distract myself. "Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." The realization that my parents, despite their final misguided action, would never have wanted me to be consumed by bitterness. I began to see that fighting Michael would only extend my suffering, keeping me bound to the betrayal rather than allowing me to heal. The money and property weren't worth the cost to my spirit, and the years of my life such a fight would consume. What I needed wasn't revenge, or even justice in the conventional sense. What I needed was closure, and perhaps in a way that Michael would never expect freedom. 3 weeks after discovering my brother's manipulation, I texted him a simple message: "We need to talk. The house tomorrow at 2." His reply came surprisingly quickly: "I'll be there." I spent the morning preparing, not with legal documents or accusations, but with a clarity of purpose that felt foreign yet right. When I arrived at the house, still thinking of it as my parents' home rather than Michael's inheritance, I found him already there, standing awkwardly in the living room, surrounded by family photographs that chronicled a shared childhood that now seemed like a fiction. "Anna," he greeted me, his tone cautious. "I was hoping we could discuss the house. I'm thinking of listing it next month, but if you need more time to go through things." He was offering a small concession, the opportunity to claim sentimental objects before he liquidated the largest asset in the estate. In his mind, this was probably generous. "I found Dad's journal," I said without preamble, placing the leather-bound book on the coffee table between us. "And I spoke with Mrs. Peterson, and I reviewed their bank statements and emails." Michael's expression shifted rapidly from confusion to wariness to something close to fear. He reached for his water bottle, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood when he'd been caught in a lie. "I don't know what you're talking about," he attempted, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Yes, you do," I replied, my voice steady. "You told them I wanted to put them in a nursing home. You said I was only caring for them to get their money. You convinced them I resented you because they loved you more. None of it was true." Michael sank onto the sofa, his defense already crumbling. "You don't understand what it was like," he began, a note of desperation in his voice. "Growing up in your shadow, never measuring up. Why can't you be more like Anna? Anna never gave us this trouble. Look how responsible Anna is." "So this was revenge for perceived childhood slights?" I asked, genuinely trying to understand the depth of his resentment. "It wasn't planned," he insisted. "When Dad got sick, I started visiting more than you knew. Not when you were here, but other times. They were always talking about you, St. Anna, who gave up everything to take care of them. It made me feel worthless." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that it sent a pang through my heart despite everything. "The first lie was spontaneous," he continued. "They mentioned you were researching care facilities, looking at all options for when things got worse. I twisted it, suggested you wanted to put them away to make your life easier. I saw how it hurt them, but also how it made me seem caring by comparison. After that, it was easy to add more suggestions, more doubts." As he spoke, laying bare the calculated way he had poisoned our dying parents against me, I waited for the anger to return. Instead, I felt an odd detachment, as though watching a sad film about strangers. "Did you need the money that badly?" I asked. "You have a successful career, a life most people would envy." Michael looked away. "It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about finally winning, being the favorite for once. I know how sick that sounds." "It is sick," I agreed quietly. "They were dying, Michael. Their minds were affected by disease and medication. They were vulnerable, and you exploited that vulnerability to satisfy some childhood grudge." He had no response to that, no justification that could possibly suffice. "I could fight this," I told him. "Contest the will on grounds of undue influence. Bring evidence of your manipulation to court. It would be messy public and would drag on for years." Michael looked up, tension visible in his jaw. "So that's why you wanted to meet? To tell me you're suing?" What I did next stunned him into silence. I placed a sealed envelope on the table next to the journal. "This isn't a lawsuit," I explained. "It's a letter. Read it after I leave." Then I delivered the news that had brought me here. "I've accepted a teaching position at an international school in Portugal. I start in August." "Portugal?" He echoed, clearly blindsided by this unexpected turn. "But your house, your job here?" "I'm selling my house. The school has arranged temporary housing until I find something permanent. I've always wanted to travel to experience living abroad. Our parents' deaths have shown me how short life is, how quickly opportunities can pass. Michael stared at me, confusion evident. So you're just leaving, giving up, letting me have everything? I stood then, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I'm not giving up, Michael. I'm letting go. There's a difference. I walked slowly around the living room, touching familiar objects one last time. The clock Dad had inherited from his father, the bookshelf where Mom had displayed her collection of bird figurines, the worn spot on the sofa where I had sat countless evenings keeping them company. You know what I realized? I said, turning back to Michael. This inheritance, this money, it's tainted. It represents the worst moment in our family's history, when deceit won out over truth. Even if I fought and won every dollar, would be a reminder of this ugliness. So what's in the letter? He asked, eyeing the envelope warily. Forgiveness, I said simply. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Carrying this anger and betrayal would only poison my new beginning. So I'm choosing to release it. And you. Michael's expression was a mixture of disbelief and the dawning realization that this outcome, me walking away without a fight, somehow felt worse than the conflict he had anticipated. The irony, I continued, moving toward the door, is that in trying to win our parents' legacy, you've actually lost the most valuable thing they left behind. Not their money or this house, but their example of integrity and love. That's the real inheritance, and it's one you can't take from me. At the threshold, I paused for one final look at my brother, the stranger who shared my blood but not my values. Goodbye, Michael. I hope someday you understand what you've done and find a way to make peace with it. I walked out without waiting for his response, closing the door gently behind me on that chapter of my life. The truth is, I didn't leave empty-handed. I took the only things that really mattered: my dignity, my clear conscience, and the genuine love I had shared with our parents before Michael's poison took hold. 6 months after leaving Ohio behind, I stood on the small balcony of my apartment in Lisbon, watching the sunset paint the ancient city in hues of gold and rose. The air was scented with salt from the nearby Atlantic, and the sweet fragrance of the bougainvillea climbing my building's facade. In the distance, I could hear the mournful strains of fado music, drifting from a local restaurant, the Portuguese songs of longing and loss, somehow both foreign and deeply familiar to my heart. My new life had taken shape with surprising ease. The international school where I taught had welcomed me, warmly impressed by my credentials, and perhaps also by the quiet resilience they sensed in me. My third-grade students, a diverse group representing 12 different nationalities, brought fresh joy to my days with their curiosity and their uncomplicated affection. I had arrived in Portugal with 2 suitcases and a heart still tender from betrayal. Now, I had a cozy apartment in a historic building, a growing circle of friends from around the world, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The weight of caregiving, followed by grief, followed by betrayal, had finally lifted, replaced by the lightness of possibility. The mail arrived that afternoon with a thick envelope bearing an Ohio postmark. I recognized Michael's handwriting immediately and set it aside, needing to prepare myself for whatever it contained. After dinner, with a glass of Portuguese wine for courage, I finally opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $600,000, half the value of our parents' estate, along with a handwritten letter. Anna, it began. After you left, I read your letter a dozen times. At first, I was angry that you would forgive me so easily. It felt like another way for you to claim moral superiority. Then I was relieved, thinking I had gotten away with everything. But as weeks passed, I found I couldn't enjoy any of it. The house felt haunted, not by Mom and Dad, but by what I had done to them, to you. Your forgiveness has been the heaviest burden I've ever carried, because it offered no excuses for my behavior, no justification I could hide behind. It simply named my actions for what they were, and then refused to be defined by them. I've started therapy to understand why I was capable of such cruelty. The answers aren't pretty and the work is painful, but it's necessary. I don't expect this money to repair what I've broken between us. I don't expect a relationship or even a reply. This isn't about earning forgiveness. You've already given that unearned gift. This is about taking the first step toward being someone who might someday deserve it. The house is sold. I've divided everything exactly in half. This is yours, no strings attached. Do with it what you will. Michael. I sat with the letter for a long time, emotions washing through me in waves. Surprise, vindication, a complex mixture of sadness and hope. The money itself was significant, enough to buy a permanent home in Lisbon, to travel during school breaks, to build the financial security I had sacrificed during my years of caregiving. But more meaningful was the acknowledgement the first step toward truth, and perhaps someday healing. After careful consideration, I decided to use the money in a way that honored my parents' true legacy, not the distorted version Michael had manipulated. I established the Wilson Family Caregiver Foundation, a nonprofit that provided respite care, financial assistance, and emotional support to family caregivers. The foundation would ensure that others who walked the path I had traveled would not do so alone or at such great personal cost. 3 months after receiving Michael's letter, I returned to Ohio for the foundation's launch event. Michael had asked to attend, and after some soul searching, I had agreed. He appeared dramatically changed from our last encounter, thinner, humbler, his expensive suit replaced by more modest attire. He spoke briefly at the event, publicly acknowledging the truth of what had happened and committing to serve on the foundation's board, using his business expertise to help it grow. It was an awkward reunion, fraught with unspoken emotions and memories that would never fully heal. But it was also the beginning of something new. Not the close sibling relationship we might have had in another life, but a careful, intentional rebuilding based on truth rather than obligation. Back in Portugal, my life continued to expand in ways I never could have imagined during those dark days after the will reading. I had begun dating Paulo, a kind-hearted literature professor, who understood grief and family complexity, having navigated his own difficult relationship with his father. My students and their families had become a kind of chosen family, inviting me to celebrations and weekend outings that filled my calendar and my heart. On the anniversary of my mother's death, I visited a small chapel near my apartment, lighting candles for both my parents. I wore my mother's wedding ring on a chain around my neck, the one item I had been left in that devastating will. Now, instead of representing exclusion, it felt like a talisman connecting me to her love, which I chose to believe had been real and enduring despite Michael's interference. The greatest lesson in all of this has been understanding that family bonds are complex and imperfect. They can be damaged by jealousy, misunderstanding, and deliberate cruelty. But they can also be reimagined and rebuilt not as they were, but as they might become when founded on honesty and choice rather than obligation and resentment. My parents' true legacy wasn't money or property. It was the example they set through decades of marriage, through raising children as best they could, through facing illness with dignity. Even in their final confusion, manipulated by a son they desperately wanted to believe in, they were doing what they thought was right with the distorted information they had been given. The inheritance that matters most is not what was written in their will, but what is written in my character, the resilience, compassion, and integrity they helped nurture. Those qualities led me to care for them, to forgive my brother, and ultimately to find freedom in letting go of what I couldn't change, to embrace what I could build anew. As Paulo likes to remind me, quoting a Portuguese proverb, "Life is what we make of it. Travel is the traveler. What we see isn't what we see, but what we are." I am no longer defined by betrayal or loss, by what was taken or what was never given. I am defined by my choices, by the life I continue to create, by the love I choose to give, despite having been hurt. That is the richest inheritance of all. Have you ever had to forgive someone in your family for a betrayal? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and transformation. And don't forget to share with someone who might be struggling to find peace after family conflict. Remember, sometimes the greatest power comes not from fighting for what should be yours, but from choosing what kind of person you want to be. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength on your own journey toward healing.